Welcome to Designed2Respond. We all watch the same show, but we all don't walk away with the same conclusions. On this channel, we don't just watch media, we examine it. From documentaries to series, I break down how stories are told, what's emphasized, what's missing, and why it matters. Because experience shapes how we analyze media and narratives. Today's episode is going to be on the Netflix documentary, Evil Influencer, the Jodi Hildebrandt story. This came out on Netflix December 30th of 2025. If you have not seen the actual documentary, pause this video and go and watch it so that I'm not ruining it for you. I will give you a trigger warning. It does document abuse, mental, physical, and child. So if that is something that you do not like to consume or have a difficult time watching, you can choose not to watch it or you can brace yourself. There are points that are difficult to see and hear, but you will not have samples of physical abuse shown during the documentary, if that makes a difference for you on whether or not you would like to watch it. For everyone else who has already seen it, let's get into it. The documentary starts off in Ivins City, Utah, which is considered an affluent neighborhood composed of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Mormon community. Utah and those areas have large populations of LDS members. The documentary starts with video footage of a young boy ringing a doorbell saying he needs help with personal business. The homeowner, who initially answers the doorbell, calls 911 and he says he needs help with a child who has obviously been abused. The dispatcher sends out a notification response call for a boy who has duct tape on his ankles and appears to be malnourished. This is based off the details provided by the neighbor. Police and EMS respond to the scene and immediately determine the child had been abused. They then called their lead detective to come out to the scene due to the severity of the child's injuries. They felt that she needed to be included on their attempts to try and understand what had happened to this young boy. As the documentary continues, it kind of shifts in details. So it goes between the young man going to look for help, to when the police respond, to the police talking to one another, to when EMS responds, to when EMS is talking to one another. And then it kind of goes back to the details that the young boy had provided to both the neighbor and to the first responders that were on the scene. The residents of the third home are the ones who called police and identified Jodi Hildebrandt's home as the home that he had escaped from. Upon conversations with the young boy, he discloses that he has a younger sister at the house, but he has not seen her for a month. His mother's name is Ruby Frank. She is a friend or associate of Jodi Hildebrandt. The police decided that they needed to identify the exact house and do a security sweep of the house to see if other children were in danger. They find a house. Jodi answers the door, but she's refusing to step out to allow them to go in. So they forcefully enter. At the same time, she is on the phone with whom she claims to be a lawyer, and they're going into the house, and she is trying to dissuade them from doing that, asking if they have a warrant and other things. They go through the house, room to room, calling out, searching for other victims, and they find another small child sitting in the closet. This child is quiet, timid, and unwilling to talk. At this point, the lead detective appears on the scene. Her name is Jessica Bate. She was the only detective at the department at the time. She comes on the scene. She's being given an update about what has transpired so far. She gets a call from the Department of Child and Family Services, and they tell her to do an internet search for 8 passengers, which is a social media handle for the mother of these 2 children. She does that search and she obtains information about the family of the children in custody. Now, I'm being somewhat vague for copyright purposes. I don't want Netflix to flag the video. I am leaving out details because I want you to be able to have your own thoughts form as you see the documentary play out. So at this point, the Washington County attorney comes in to provide additional information that the Franke family, which consists of Ruby Franke and Kevin Franke, have 6 children. The two oldest children are no longer in the home, and they reside in Springfield, Utah. Police officers locate that home to go in, try and check the status of the other children. They learn that the two middle children were in the custody of the mother. She had taken them to a family friend's home. They were not able to locate the father at that time. They returned to Ivan's. Upon returning to Ivan's, Kevin Frank, the husband and the father of the 6 children that are the main subject of the documentary, appears at the police department. He had been contacted to go to the Ivan's police department to get his children. So the police officers begin to question him about his previous whereabouts, the condition of his children, and to see what information he had about how the children were being cared for, where they were, whose care they were in, those sort of things. Upon questioning him, he begins to give them background on Jodi and Ruby's relationship. He indicates that their oldest son, Chad, was going through a rebellious stage and they were having a difficult time with it. And so Ruby Frank sought the assistance of Jodi Hildebrandt with handling Chad. That is how their family came into contact with Jodi. Jodi was able to get to know the family, get to know the dynamic of the husband and wife, and get to know the dynamic of the children. So the police ask him if he is aware of his children living at Jodi's house, and he says he was not aware of that. They ask him when the last time he's seen his children, and he says he has not seen his family in over a year. They continue to ask questions, and as they're asking questions, the questions are more directed towards Jodi. And the officer says, "What do you think about their relationship, Jodi and Ruby? How do you consider Jodi?" He reiterates to Kevin that his primary focus is Jodi, and Kevin is like, he can detect that. The officer then goes, I want to give you an understanding of something. We responded to a call of a child who was malnourished, emaciated, and abused. And Kevin was like, what? Like, he didn't understand what that meant. And he said that the child had not eaten, the child was underweight, the child was in need of help, and Kevin was shocked. His guard begins to come down at that point, right? Because you can tell that he did not know any of the circumstances around why the children were at the police department. It appeared that he received a call to go and pick up his children, but he was not provided any context. So he initially was kind of standoffish with the police, trying to figure things out on his own, but he did not go into the interview that was displayed from the body cam footage, asking any questions about the condition of his children, when he can see them, can he get them, what's going on. He was just kind of being led and directed by the officers, not in a combative like form at all, but just in a very passive position from my perspective. I feel like if it was me responding to someone calling me to pick up my child or a child that was in my care from the police station, when I got there, my first kind of interaction would have been like, okay, what's going on? Why is he here? Did they get in trouble? Did they do something wrong? Something. He was completely like sitting there kind of like mute, like he did not seem to have the affect and behavior that I feel would have been expected in this kind of scenario, which led me to understand that he didn't know what was going on. But it was also perplexing to me because he did not seem alarmed. Me personally, I'm like, why would you be calling me about my child at a police station? What happened? You understand what I'm saying? But I'm a woman. As the documentary continues, it cuts in and out between Kevin's interview, what the police are doing in one city, looking for the other kids. My notes might seem all over the place, but it kind of goes from place to place. As the police find Jodi's house, their initial interest was to make sure that there were no more victims of a crime, which allowed them entry and to retrieve the small girl. But now that they are sure that there was a crime that was committed, they would like to collect evidence. So they call in to request that a warrant be issued so they can search her residence. The warrant is issued and the police start to go from room to room, taking pictures, collecting items, dusting, asking Jodi questions. She's vaguely answering one or two, but kind of playing like, what's going on? Then it transitions to people from Jodi's background before this incident who are offering context on her. These people are different types of mental health professionals who have either worked with Jodi, who was a therapist offering mental health counseling to couples, to families, and individuals in the LDS community. Now you're getting interviews from different mental health professionals who are basically discussing Jodi's reputation and how her mental health practice was shaped by her childhood experiences. Through these details, we learn that Jodi is a divorcee with 2 adult children. We learned that within the mental health community, she is known for being a dominating personality who wants to feel that her presence is always influential. They interview someone who wanted to work for Jodi at a point, who had been interviewed by her for a position. And this person says that during the interview, Jodi was asking her if she knew how to utilize a confrontation method in therapy. And she said, as a therapist, that was not a typical strategy that therapists use to assist their clients in overcoming whatever their mental health challenges were. Then we continue to learn from other people more about her early childhood experiences. Jodi was abused and isolated as a child, which kind of shapes the narrative that she has now become the perpetrator, abusing and isolating both children and adults. So now we're back at the police station, and the police are attempting to interview both Jodi and Ruby. Jodi lawyers up immediately. She did that from the house. So she's like, under advice of counsel, I won't be talking to you about much of anything. So they didn't have much to work with there. Ruby, on the other hand, took a position of being non-cooperative, but also a mannequin, in which the police would ask her questions and she would just sit there and stare as if she did not understand, as if she had issues with comprehension, to the point that they started to question her mental capacity. At that point, they had accumulated enough evidence from the home to decide that they were going to charge both Jodi and Ruby with second-degree child abuse. We go back to Kevin, who was providing additional context, and the police were asking Kevin about how Jodi and Ruby came into contact with one another. And Kevin says in 2018, their oldest son, Chad, was going through a rebellious stage, and Ruby sought help from Jodi to manage Chad. In that, Jodi was able to learn about the family and learn that they had a large social media presence, which they were using to generate income and to create a livelihood for Ruby. Jodi assessed that social media and essentially decided that taking on Ruby's case with her son Chad and her other children would be advantageous for her to show other families that she had the ability to assist them in their parenting struggles. Eventually, it turned into where Ruby and Jodi were doing a business together, where they were creating all of this content around parenting and how to manage a family setting that falls in line with the LDS practices and in line with Jodi's unconventional practices that would turn family dynamics around. But the gist of the matter is, Ruby was in genuine need and Jodi took an opportunity. Kevin Frankie and Ruby Frankie, as husband and wife, started to do counseling with Jodi on their part of the relationship within the family setting. That consisted of Jodi leading Kevin to reevaluate his personality and behaviors to determine whether or not he was being what she perceived a good husband. So essentially, they were in Jodi's counseling program for about 3 years. And in 2021, Jodi decided that she would move into the Frankie home. So initially, Kevin was okay with the idea. She moved into the home. She was there for a short period of time. And then she started to essentially have a mental break where she believed she was being tormented and hunted. Kevin said he protested her being in the home, but Ruby insisted, and Ruby essentially offered to sleep in the same room / in the same bed with Jodi to manage her night terrors and whatever other symptoms she was experiencing at that time. This is when Kevin indicates that he saw a change in how he was being treated by his wife. Jodi was prompting Ruby to set hard boundaries with Kevin. For example, he could not go upstairs in his home. Ruby checked if Jodi was okay with that first. Certain parts of the home were he was excluded access from. There would be times where Ruby and Jodi were both in isolation together for hours at a time. and he was not able to interact with his wife. He said that when they would be isolated and then he would again have access, Ruby and Jodi would come out and be in some sort of euphoric cloud nine state, speaking of how they had an intense breakthrough together and how as a result of the breakthrough that Ruby had visions of the future and how things would progress. It was at that point that Evan was essentially told he needed to leave the home and live separately from his wife and his children. He did so as he was also being told that he was an addict. That became a common theme. Different clients who had sought counseling and therapy services for marital issues or family issues. In 2023, Ruby and Jodi moved to Jodi's house in Ivins. During the summer break from school, they took Ruby's two youngest children and moved into Jodi's house and began creating all of this social media content surrounding strict, stern parenting support. They took Ruby's initial social media, which had almost 1 million followers, and renamed it to a joint social media that directed traffic from Ruby's pages to Jodi's therapeutic services. So I'm not sure when school lets out in Utah. I know that in different parts of the state, some children get out of school at the end of May, some early June, mid-June, end of June. This is the time frame that we're considering. So let's say May through end of June is when the children are getting out of school and moving to Ivins to live in Jodi's house. The young boy escaped from Jodi's house in August. So if we are looking at the timeline, we would say that he was living in that home for anywhere between 1 month to 8 weeks before he escaped to the neighbor's house, where they described him as malnourished, barefoot, bound, and bruised in 2 short months. Jodi's former clients were interviewed, and many of them gave different accounts of the details of their counseling sessions with Jodi. The first was Ian Prate. He was a former Connections member and a client of Jodi. He expressed that in Utah, influencer culture is more centered around families and motherhood. That is a large part of like the LDS community, supporting a family structure, creating families, sustaining families, that sort of thing. He says that he joined Connections hoping to better his family cohesiveness because it's implied that he felt like there were some issues within the marriage that they hoped to be able to address. He said, after a short time of working under Judy's care, she concluded that he was a sex addict and that he needed to be isolated from his wife and child. She determined that he had an addiction for lust and that if he wanted to save his marriage, he would comply with a no contact order between himself, his wife, and his young child. So he did. He said with time, he noticed that her behavior, her language, her direction, her counseling, and her support language was extremely different towards men than it was towards women. And he felt that she was attempting to break the men down. He began to challenge some of her principles and her suggestions, and he was told if he wanted his marriage to work, he would follow her instructions without resistance. This resulted in him being divorced within a year. Next was Valerie Jackson. She was also a former client of Jodi's who sought marital counseling. During her interview, she found it difficult to express what her marital issues stemmed from. She did acknowledge that she felt like she was sexually immature going into the marriage, but she could not indicate what she hoped to attain or what she felt needed to be addressed in the marriage that led her to Jodi in the first place. She says after counseling her and her husband for some time, Jodi decided that her husband was a sex addict. She insisted that they did not need sex. She forced them to separate with no contact for any reason whatsoever. And Valerie felt like she was so desperate for help to improve the quality of her marriage that she did not resist, but she started to see red flags. So after some months of noticing the red flags, she and her husband decided to leave Connections counseling, but ultimately they still ended up divorced. And she credits Jodi's influence in her marriage for the divorce. I found her particularly interesting because it seemed she didn't know what she needed help with. And so for me, I'm like, what did you articulate and express to this woman then? I don't know if it's a case where because she knows it's a documentary that's going to be distributed worldwide, she's attempting to like redact some details for personal reasons, for sensitivity reasons, which she's allowed to, but it just also has me questioning she genuinely needed counseling or whether she needed marital counseling or maybe individual therapy to be able to better know what she wants, know what she's looking for, because I have no kind of understanding of what led her to Jodi, but I know that Jodi led her to divorce. Then we go into Kevin Frankie, who we originally talked about to a degree. At this point in the documentary, they show clips of Kevin from his and Ruby's social media platform, to which they had videos and testimonials of how their counseling with Jodi was working. He describes himself as a man who expected sex and considered sex to be a form of currency. Initially, with Jodi's boundaries, Kevin felt that his and Ruby's sex life became more wholesome, despite the fact that they already had 6 children in their LDS. I don't know much about the LDS sex life, but I feel like they aren't the kind of people that I would assume to not have wholesome like sex. I think what I processed from him saying more wholesome was maybe more balanced, in the sense that Ruby was more empowered to determine when she genuinely wanted to have sex, as opposed to feeling like it was her duty as a wife. That was my comprehension of his statement. He also indicated that Jodi decided that he was a sex addict. He didn't say sex addict, but he says an addict in his interview. But the implication from some of the other statements is Jodi is insisting that these married couples have abusive sex lives, abusive marital lives, abusive households. Abuse was something she taunted before all of these men and women, mostly indicating that the husbands were abusive. She stated that if you watch pornography one time within a year, you were an addict. And that was the basis for how she determined which husbands or sex addicts who needed to be isolated from their wives and have extreme boundaries set in order for them to save their marriages. Once they cleared Kevin as a suspect in the child abuse, he started to break down. That is the general gist. The direction of the documentary is more focused on Jodi. But for me, the documentary builds up from the initial scenes where the young boy is looking for help from the neighbors in the form of food and the police. I'm going to start like my analytical assessment of what I saw from there. Once they cleared Kevin as a suspect, I kind of wish that we could have seen him be reunited with the children to see kind of his reaction to what their state was. Not that we're entitled to, but I just think that it would have been a pivotal point to add into this documentary to kind of drive home how far removed he was from all of what was happening and how severely traumatizing it was for him and the children. Because you could tell when he learned some of the details, outside of being confused and shocked, he was hurt. But even for me, not knowing these children or knowing his family, seeing the initial state of the boy looking for help was difficult to watch. I mean, it's a 12-year-old. These kids are young, vulnerable. Like, starving children is just unfathomable for why adult women would think that they were doing that in good faith. Anyway, I also wish that we could have seen, or that the officers could have brought Kevin into the room with Ruby, or brought Ruby into the room with Kevin, so that we could have been able to see if, one, her willingness to talk to the police changed, if his presence changed her demeanor, if him seeing her for the first time in a year would have elicited some sort of reaction that would have led to more communication or any of those sorts of things. When we did see the videos from their social media from the early years of them being in counseling till now, you can see a stark difference in their size and their physical disposition, just as parents. They never discussed whether she revised a diet or anything for them, but looking at their faces alone, they were sleek and slender compared to the years prior, especially Kevin. So I was kind of feeling like maybe bringing Kevin into that room with Ruby could have afforded the police the opportunity to hear her either continue with what she was displaying or to change. And you couldn't tell if, when his initial interview was being conducted, if Ruby was still at the police station at that time. I'm not sure how far Springfield, Utah and Ivins, Utah are. He did say he had to come from their, I guess, hometown to go and pick up the kids. I don't know how fast he got there. We don't know all of those details, but I just felt like that would have been a useful piece to have had. The other thing that I noted was the 911 dispatcher asked the 911 caller if the child appears to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And my question is, why was that the first thing that you thought? I mean, because the reality is, like, let's say he said yes. Yeah, he's high. He's drunk. It doesn't change if the police need to come out. Maybe you tell them the EMS to make sure they have Norcan or something if you don't know if it could turn into an overdose case. But he's describing age in small child. And so I just thought that was a little strange to be like one of the first questions that she's asking. The other thing that I was wondering about was I understand that they described Jodi as a doomsday prepper, but why does she need a panic room in the Latter-day Saints community? Like, if you're around all of these heavily religious people, panic rooms are typically for break-ins, fire maybe, that's set, those kind of things. Why did you need a panic room in a community full of people who are supposed to be do-gooders? Like the youngest Frankie boy, they go back to the doorbell camera footage. In the beginning, they give you a small snippet, and then towards the end, they give you a little more. Initially, he rings and he's like, I just need a favor or two. Can you take me to the police and can you give me something to eat? And to me, that says that he knew that there was better out there with the police than whatever he was experiencing in that house. Right? The initial way that Ruby came into contact with Jodi was to help her with Chad, that they said was rebelling. But I'm wondering if the youngest, seeing Chad's rebellion, seeing Chad maybe stand up for himself, seeing Chad maybe not take what they say as the absolute answer or the way things need to be, as something that helped this youngest boy say, I got to get out of here. Like, this can't be it. There has to be something else. Because he's a small child. And what they describe throughout the documentary is that Jodi essentially brainwashed Ruby. And if you're able to brainwash an adult, you should be able to brainwash a child. Brainwashing usually keeps you from going to get help, from seeking to get out, and from seeking to get away. And so if she's able to brainwash an adult, what was it about this little boy that made it clear for him that whatever they were saying and doing was not the only option for him? You understand? Because his mother had been threatening him with taking him to the police and sending him to jail because she was unsatisfied with his behavior. That seemed like typical 12-year-old behavior. It did not seem like rebellious behavior or any of that kind of stuff, but she kept threatening him with jail. And finally, he said, jail has got to be better than this. And I said, he's a genius. He saved his life and he saved his little sister's life. Clearly, she was more in a confused state. She's 9 at the time that they recovered her. She was not willing to talk to police, similar to her mother. She was more shocked and traumatized. And he hadn't seen her in a month. But he decided that no matter what they had been telling him, he was not accepting what they were saying as the only option. So he had been begging his mother to take him to jail. And when she wouldn't, he said, somebody else do it because it got to be better than this. And I feel like Chad's influence on him probably saved him. My other questions were, how do they know that Ruby's 2 oldest children were estranged? It would have been valuable for us, the viewers, to understand, how some of this information came in. I understand that it's an investigation. They're not going to provide us all the details, but just for shaping a full picture, that would have been valuable to me. How did the state's attorney come to understand, and the police officers, because they said that early, that the 2 oldest children were estranged and out of the house? Who provided them that information? Number 1. Number 2, Kevin, when these 2 oldest children were leaving the house, what was the reasoning behind it? What was your perspective behind them leaving? What was your perspective of their behaviors? Because we're getting a lot of Ruby's perspective, which shaped Jodi's perspective that led to Jodi's abusive behavior. But Kevin, as the parent who the police and investigators have determined to not be culpable in abuse, what is your perspective of how the children behave and act? That would have been valuable to be included in the documentary from my perspective. The body cam footage was chef's kiss, top tier, very influential. Not only because it showed how things played out, but it showed the demeanor. Number 1, Ruby comes into the house sloshing through like a child who's just been told that they are on punishment. The police of the United States of America are here to retrieve your children from your custody. And you come into the room stomping your feet like you've just been told you cannot go to prom. You know what that tells me? She was fully aware that her behavior could elicit this kind of reaction. And she's fully aware that her behavior is wrong. She didn't come into the house saying, what's going on? Why are you taking my children? I've been doing a great job with them. I've almost gotten them to the point that they need to be to turn their lives around. They are reforming. She didn't come in the house like that. She came in the house like a Bratz doll who just got told, if I see you with that boy one more time, y'all going to jail. So explain to me, Ruby, why the attitude? We can't get that because she's not complying. Fine. My point is, watching her is what made me feel like, while this is being called the evil influencer, the Jodi Hildebrandt story, this should have been called Moms of Truth, because the focus was on Jodi and what Jodi did to lead to these events. I get it. But I wanted more focus on Ruby, because I do not understand how you carried 6 children, brought them into the world to then go and assist and support someone in physically abusing them to the point where they looked like those children weighed 50 something pounds at 11 and 9 years old. I want to hear from her. You hear from her towards the end, but what I heard from her, it wasn't enough. Okay? I want to hear from Ruby. Come, please. Because explain this to me. Kids do kid things. They're climbing up the walls. A little talking back. He doesn't want to be in your vlog. He's texting at the table. You thought that was grounds for your children to be 50 pounds? You had your child sleeping on a beanbag for months? Which leads me to feel like, Kevin, come here. Because you might not be as bad as her, but I'm feeling like you're not as great as you should be. So while you sought counseling for making your marriage better in the sense of more connectivity with your wife, what kind of connectivity did you have with these children that you brought into the world? Yes, the stories about Jodi and Ruby, but I cannot help but to wonder, under what circumstances can you, as the head of the household, be told to leave your children and not see them for a year and comply? You left your children and did not see them for a year. That's 4 out of the 6. What kind of contact were you having with the oldest 2? I didn't know. I feel bad for Kevin a little bit because I feel like he's probably not an addict. But Kevin, I wanted to hear that you were fighting for your children. Before the police came, once the police came, and once Ruby was in jail, I wanted to see a little bit more resistance. I don't know if it's something in the Utah air that makes everyone seem slightly sedated. In a second interview, Kevin goes into detail about how Ruby wanted help with Chad. And this is when he's disclosing that she's decided he's a sex addict. I don't know anything about the LDS community, but it's like, are all of the men like Kevin and Ethan? I like the lead attorney. He seemed even keeled, but Kevin was a little too even for me. I need you to rise, okay? Ethan seemed like a nice guy, but when he said he missed his daughter's first birthday, he was broken up by it. I needed you to give them people hell about it. For what? Why couldn't you be present? What had you done that warranted that you could not be present for your child's first birthday party? They ended up putting Jodi and Ruby in the car together to go off to the jail, which I just thought was like, why? Why weren't they in separate cars? Apparently they were in the car together singing hymns and holding hands on their way to the Purgatory Correctional Facility. And I said, I love the name of it. I wanted them to stay in purgatory forever. But jail should feel like hell, so I hope that is exactly what it should be. Ruby's initial 8-passenger vlogs from her social media were analyzed by Jessica Bate. And she said, when Ruby described that her son had been sleeping on a beanbag and different things, the people in the comments were eating her up and calling them abusive from then. And this is part of the reason why I felt that they had proof from the vlogs that Ruby, independent of Jodi, made abusive-like decisions for her children. The DA said that the evidence provided in those vlogs did not meet, he didn't say this verbatim, but this is my interpretation of what he said, that the evidence in the blogs did not meet the criteria for what they consider to be criminal abuse. He did feel like she was living on a borderline between doing things that were inappropriate and doing things that were considered normal within parenting abilities. But she was right at the border, and then Jodi came and pushed her over. And so the question is, when you see people exhibiting yellow behaviors, should you intervene? I think that Ruby needed intervention from her husband or someone else that she actually respected. I just could not understand how the documentary was kind of framing the concept that religion was what was keeping these different people from utilizing valuable common sense. I was just like, is that what religion does? Is that what it's supposed to do? Is this what people who observe religion and feel like they're doing it in good faith feel like when they're looking at something that goes against their common sense, that religion is teaching them that they should operate in faith when common sense says they're doing the wrong thing? I'm not going to be able to reconcile with that. In interviews with the former clients, former employees, different people who had experience with Jodi, the question came up about whether or not Jodi is a lesbian and if she was isolating these women because of some sexual or intimate fantasies or sexual or intimate feelings that she was not outwardly able to express. I do not believe that she is. I believe that Jodi is a narcissist. All of the people who came forward to speak about their experiences with her indicated she exhibits controlling behavior, isolative behavior, manipulative behavior. She gets on a power trip. She has a grandiose image of self. She has a grandiose image of her thoughts. And then additionally, she has these moments and periods of mental instability, hallucination, inability, unwillingness to take accountability for her actions. And that is what a narcissist is. They actually do not care about anybody. No, everything is about getting you to be under their spell, believe what they say, take what they say at face value. And so I think that if you examine the details that have been provided about Jodi's childhood and marriage that also ended in divorce, this is my belief, this is strictly opinion based off of the details provided. I believe that Jodi's former husband probably came to her with some thoughts about their sex life. Maybe he wanted to experience certain things now that he is married. You have to take in mind the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints community is one of these Mormon communities that believes in no premarital sex, no dating and certain things before marriage. And so for a lot of these people and couples, Jodi included, it's implied that they did not do these things before marriage. And so these people are getting into first-time relationships and now they're trying to explore their sexuality as adults. And I believe that maybe he wanted to try some things or he wanted more sex than she was comfortable with giving. She decided that he was a sex addict and she was refusing to do certain things, which ultimately led to their divorce. She then went on to replicate that thought and those experiences with every relationship she had influence over after. And I feel like she did that intentionally to isolate these women from these men, not because she is a lesbian, but because she wanted the power to be what she perceived the abuser to be. She is dangling sexual abuse and just the idea of abuse before all of these relationships while being abusive. She's telling these people who have finally gotten married and gotten into intimate relationships that they cannot do the basic things that support relationships and marriages, which is talk to one another, live with one another, be sexually intimate with one another, and co-parent children that they've created with one another. She's keeping them from doing that under the guises of bettering their marriage, which in actuality is the entire basis of marriage. You're excluding them from acting as married people, expecting that not participating in these activities will make the marriage stronger. And all you see is there is no marriage as a result of her isolative tactics. The same way there was no more marriage for her marriage. She did it from the perspective of trying to force these women to label all of these men as abusive addicts because she's abusive and she's addicted to playing mind games. I don't think that she's sexually attracted to Ruby. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying based off of the evidence that we have been provided, I don't think that she was sexually attracted to Ruby. I think that she was fiscally attracted to Ruby's money and fiscally attracted to Ruby's following and fiscally attracted to Ruby's naivete. But I don't think that she was physically attracted to Ruby's body for the purposes of putting her body on Ruby's body. I think that she was attracted to Ruby because Ruby lacked confidence, she lacked common sense, and she lacked boundaries, which made her very attractive to Jodi. And the DA said in some point, he felt that Jodi was testing Ruby. 100%. That is what they do. They test boundaries. They test to see how much you're going to let them get away with. They test to see what your limitations are, and they decide how to handle you around that. I just found her behavior to be typical of people who have these personality types, and they are always self-destructive. Another symptom of people with narcissistic personality types are oversharing and overtalking. You saw Ruby say she's not complying. She got a lawyer. From as soon as the police knocked on the door, hey, I got a lawyer. But she kept running her mouth and digging a grave for herself. So much so that she, who claimed to be innocent, said to the police officer, those children do not need to be around other children. They're not safe, which implies that everything that the child has written in his journal that you said or did, you said or did. You're confirming the allegations because you can't be quiet. And that's normal for them, okay? Ruby's jailhouse phone calls. I believe these are Ruby's because they did not label them during the documentary. And you try to kind of get a feel for what their voices are like. And then at some points they will put a picture on the screen and you assume that that is who is talking. But Ruby, within the first day that she goes to jail, she calls Kevin, who she hasn't called in years. Now you calling Kevin twice in a day. Let me not say years. You ain't talked to Kevin on the phone because Jodi said so. And how long? Now that the shit has hit the fan and the police is going to put you in the same predicament you put your child in, now you know how to call Kevin's phone. And Kevin is answering the phone and having a conversation with you like you his girlfriend. Not like you are the mother and the wife of the children he had who put his children in danger. He's talking to you calm and collected. And I'm just like, Kevin is better than me. Kevin is better than me. Okay. So I was just trying to figure out why, Kevin, are you not holding her accountable? Why are you not asking her any questions? Maybe he did, and that part was redacted, but his general tone is like, they said that they're keeping the children in the hospital for 3 days. And she's like, what? That's absolutely ridiculous. They're being dramatic. And he doesn't say they're not being dramatic. My son weighs 50 pounds. I don't know for sure that he weighs 50 pounds, but why isn't he doing that? Maybe Kevin was more of an outspoken person before they came in contact with Jodi. And as a result of Jodi telling him that he was an abuser for years, he has learned to redact his natural responses. It was difficult for me to listen to him talk to her like, yeah, this is what they said, like pushback. I wanted to hear some pushback. So eventually the light bulb starts to go off for Ruby. And she's doing additional jailhouse phone calls where she says that when they got to the jail, they were in separate jails. And that's when the light bulb essentially goes off. I'm kind of like, does Jodi involve herself in black magic? Like, you need to be within certain proximity of her to understand the severity of things. You were out of the house in another city and you got a call that the police were here picking up your kids. That was enough distance. Why didn't the light bulb go off then? Like, I feel like blaming Jodi is letting Ruby off the hook entirely too much for me. When the police were present and they're asking you questions and you were just there blinking like you were a lightning bug, the light bulb didn't go off for you. But once you got to the jailhouse and you realized you could no longer be sleeping in the same bed with Jodi, the light bulb, maybe she is a lesbian, girl. I don't know. I mean, you are clink, clink, locked into the car and the light bulb still didn't go off. Once you got in there and saw, oh, I'm in here with people who have done whatever they have done, that's when it's like, Jodi lied. Did Jodi tell you she had connections in the purgatory that was going to get y'all out? Like, what's happening? I need more accountability from Ruby and Kevin. Her non-compliance with the police and unwillingness to speak was, to me, a confirmation that she knew that if she did speak, she would worsen her case, which to me also indicates that it's not that the light bulb went off, but now it's a self-preservation mode. Initially, you were trying to preserve the future for you and Jodi. Now you're trying to shift some of that blame to Jodi so you can see how you can get yourself out of it. And I just don't respect it. Lastly, they as it goes to end, they say that Kevin divorced Ruby. And I want to know why. You was just talking to the girl on the phone like that was your girlfriend. Like, what was the final straw that broke the camel's back? Was it being in the courtroom and hearing details? I mean, again, this is not my child. And I should have said this in the beginning. I have a personal thing with children and child abuse. Like, it just really, 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 really grinds my gears. So I view everything from the perspective of what I would do. And so my thought is, even if I did not know the severity of the trauma, the harm, the whatever, once I found out my child was 1 at a police station, 2 at a hospital, 3 being talked to by DCFS, I want to see what you have. I want to hear the details. Once I receive those details, me and Ruby are no longer family, because you don't do this to a child that you forced me to leave in your care. And I have any ability to think with grace about you. That's my perspective. So I just am like, what made you file for divorce? Was it learning that she's going to jail and she's not coming out, so you definitely have no chance of having a wife? Maybe now you're like, time to find a replacement? Like, when did he decide it was over? I just want to know, at what point did Kevin actually say, Ruby is irredeemable? Because Ruby was irredeemable for me as soon as she walked up in that damn living room looking like a Bratz doll, okay? Ultimately, Ruby and Jodi were convicted of 4 of 6 counts of second-degree aggravated child abuse. Washington County attorney saying Ruby absolutely committed crimes and she was also manipulated in committed crimes was useful, but I still feel like Ruby got a slap on the wrist. Ruby should have gotten more time than Jodi simply because she is the mother of the children. Where is your protective aspect? Where? At the end of it all, Ethan said Jodi was happy to go to prison. She was happy to go. She was like, it's whatever. Like, she was going to lose that house. She thinks that she's a prophet. She's trying to use this situation and make it seem like she's being nailed to the cross and crucified like Jesus Christ, when in actuality, she is guilty as all hell. I feel like the sentence was too light. Please drop down in these comments and give me your perspectives. I want to hear from you. Whether you agree or disagree with the conclusions suggested by this story, the way details are framed matter. Now that you've heard the breakdown and my thoughts, what's your response? I want to hear what convinced you and what left lingering questions. This is Designed to Respond, where experience shapes how we process information and form narratives.